Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the darkness surrounds me, I will not fear, no. I will not fear, no. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the darkness surrounds me, I will not fear. Sing. I will not fear. created with the sound of his voice. Scattered the darkness, you filled every void. You set into motion the rhythms of life. You kissed it with beauty, you called it all mine. You called it all mine. The one from the Father with fullness of grace, sent down from glory and given a name. You chose all the lashes, the cross and the grave, but earth could not hold you, oh Lamb that was slain. Yeah. God of resurrection, giver of redemption, you never change, oh you stay the same. God of every hour, author of all power, you never change, oh you stay the same. God of resurrection, giver of redemption, you never change, oh you stay the same. God of every hour, author of all power, you never change, oh you stay the same. I know you stay the same.
So that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Death could not hold, the veil tore before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. Heavens are roaring the praise of your glory, for you are raised to life
shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you called my name, I ran like rain out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran like rain out of the darkness into your glorious day.
Hello and happy Easter. My name is Sherry Benke and I want to welcome you to Community Online. Today is the day we celebrate that Jesus is alive. I am so glad that you're here. As we get started, let me encourage you to share this link via text or social media with your friends, family members, coworkers, and neighbors. We would love for them to join us, and your invitation can make that happen. So go ahead and share this link right now. If you're new to Community, let me say a special welcome to you. We would love to hear from you so that we can learn your name and start to get to know you. Simply text HELLO to 331-226-1686 to access our online communication card. Fill that out and someone will reach out to you in the next couple days. And don't forget, you can also reach out for prayer during this service by texting PRAY to that same number or by clicking on the prayer button. Our prayer team would love to pray for you. Here at Community, we are committed to helping people find their way back to God. People just like me and people just like you. All of us are on a spiritual journey, and at Community, we believe that journey is better traveled together. That's why we celebrate together weekly in services just like this one, to help one another grow in our love for God. It's why we connect in the week in small groups to grow our relationship with others in the church. And it's why we join together to contribute our time, talents, and treasures to love the world the way God loves the world. We call these three practices the 3 C's: celebrate, connect, and contribute. And we believe that there is always a next step for every one of us to take and grow as a 3C Christ follower. In fact, now is a perfect time to take a next step in the area of connect by joining a small group. We want every person at Community to have a meaningful relationship in the church, and the best place for that to happen is in a small group. Small groups meet at various times throughout the week. Some are online, some meet in person, and now is the perfect time to get connected because we're right in the middle of signups for our spring small group term. You can find all the information to join a group on our website at communitychristian.info or by texting group 331-226-1686. There is a group ready to welcome you. In a few minutes, lead pastor Dave Ferguson is going to bring us the Easter message. But first, let's take time to give back to God. This is a time in our service when we give generously to further the work God is doing in our church and through our church. The gifts that are given during this time fuel our mission to help more and more people find their way back to God. So I encourage you to give generously right now. You can do that through the Community app or by texting GIVE to 331-226-1686 or by clicking on the Give button. You can also send a check to our mailing address in Naperville. And as you give, let's take a look back at how people are finding their way back to God in today's Be the Church moment.
Today is one of those days that is very hopeful. The future has never been brighter for Community and the mission of Jesus. We are one church with multiple expressions, bringing love, God's love, to every living room, every office building, every community center, every school, every nook and cranny in society. And why? Here are 3 reasons why. Frank, Alyssa, and Tramisha.
My life has changed completely, and it's something that my entire family has noticed and quite frankly appreciates. I'm so thankful for this community, and I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping me find my way back to God. You've changed my life forever. Thank you.
Since I found my way back to God, my life has been so peaceful. When I got baptized, it felt like I got hit with this feeling of unconditional love. And that's not really something that I'm used to. I want to thank you, community. I am so happy to be able to call you family.
I felt like everything that I did in my past, anything that I rejected God for, I was cleansing that out of me. I also felt that I had now officially tied a bond with God. When I came up, I just felt refreshed. I felt renewed, refreshed, and it just felt amazing.
Happy Easter, community. To get us started, I need you to help me with something this Easter morning. We don't have a lot of traditions around here, but one that we do have, whether we gather in person or online like we are, is taken from the Orthodox tradition. And it's where I will say, Christ is risen, and then you respond with Easter enthusiasm, He is risen indeed. Are you ready? Now, I've asked the tech team here, the creative team, to kind of chime in, so you're going to hear them. And you can respond either in the chat or, you know what, just say it out loud wherever you are. Here we go. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed.
I love it. All right, now one more time. This time, either louder or just add exclamation points. We want to make sure the neighbors know that it's Easter. Here we go. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed.
And yes, it is that incredible truth that Jesus is alive, that death could not hold Him down. And that's what gives you and gives me, gives us hope in any and every situation. I want to begin this Easter message, first of all, just kind of keeping it as real as possible. Now, while I totally believe in my head, Christ is risen, and I do, this year, it's harder for me to feel it in my heart. And while Christ is risen is what I absolutely know, there have been too many times over the last year where it doesn't match my emotions inside. And while we might be proclaiming Easter with our voices, if we're honest, there's times we just don't feel it in our gut. And maybe you know what I mean. And I want to be with Mary proclaiming in the garden, Christ is risen. But here's my question for you. What do we do? What do you do when life feels like you're still in the grave? See, a part of my morning routine is I will catch up on current events by scanning through several different newspapers online that I subscribe to. And I do this almost every day. And I found several times this past year, I would just kind of pause and reflect and think to myself, after looking at the news, this cannot be the way it's supposed to be. This is not at all how God meant for us to live. You ever have that feeling? And I know a big part of what I'm feeling has to do with the global pandemic that took the lives of more than 2.5 million people around the world. And it's almost like it casts kind of this giant shadow over the empty grave of Easter. But for me, it's even more than that once every 100-year disease. There are other things in our world that are so broken. Did you know that for every 100 children born around the world, 9 of them will die before the age of 5? 18 of them will not get to attend school, of whom the majority are girls. Another 18 will not have access to clean drinking water. And 32 of those 100 children will suffer from malnutrition. And it is just a brutal reminder that our world is broken. And I'll tell you, when we hear stats like these, we can't help but think, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not at all how God meant for us to live. Do you feel that? I think there's no escaping the reality that our world is definitely broken. And it's not just over there. It's also closer to home. Our nation is broken. Last week, the heartbreak took place in Boulder, Colorado, with 10 lives needlessly lost. And I'm texting friends I know there to see if they're okay. The week before, 8 lives were lost in Atlanta 6 of them Asian American women, murdered. And you would think these things would unite us, but even our pain seems to divide us. You see, in our pain, we should come together and console one another. But the truth is, we don't trust one another as a nation or as individuals. Our teaching team did a little homework. Back in 1964, 77% of Americans said they trusted the U.S. government. Yeah, we trusted. By 1997, that number dropped 13% to 64% of Americans said they trusted the U.S. government. Today, only 30%, actually less than 30% of Americans fully trust our government. And strangely, we are unified about not trusting our government, but not all of us for the same reasons. And it's not just a distrust of our political leaders. We don't actually even trust each other. When researchers asked Americans if we trust each other, 70%, a staggering 70% of Americans said, the people around me, no, they can't be trusted. Now, these people, I can't trust them. So trust has been broken at the highest level and also at the interpersonal level. And until we can restore that broken trust, our nation is broken. And again, it leaves me with that feeling, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not at all how God meant for us to live. And this brokenness, it's not just, over there or out there, but it's in here. We're all broken by something. We've all hurt someone and or have been hurt by someone. And we all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equal. And every one of us, if we're the least bit introspective, we've kind of looked at our lives, at least parts of our lives, and maybe you are today and going like, no, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not how God meant for me to live. And I know, you see me frequently here. I'm kind of in a leadership role, delivering hopefully what you think is a thoughtful message. I got a Bible nearby. And because of that, it'd be very easy for you to think somehow, I don't share the same struggles as you do. Well, I do. Just ask my wife, okay? There have been times over the last year where I was afraid. And you know what? God gave me every reason to be faithful. There's times when I have doubts, deep doubts, and I obviously probably have more reason than you even to trust God. Times when I was angry, when the appropriate response should have been just deep gratitude, gratefulness. And all that stuff just kind of reminds me I'm broken. We all know it. We all feel it. And I think we all hate it. Our world, our nation, and our lives are broken. And when we're brave enough to look at these broken realities, man, it can't help but just kind of break our hearts. It's like we're living in some sort of Humpty Dumpty world that's shattered into a million pieces on the ground. A world where all of our efforts and all of our resources, all the king's horses, all the king's men can't quite put it back together again. Now, let me clarify. When I say we're broken, it doesn't mean that every part of life doesn't work. No, we still have friends. We still have some good days, right? We still have jobs. Life kind of works, but it's broken. I was trying to figure out how to illustrate this. Maybe this will work for you. For most of my adult life, I was a member of the crappy car club. And part of the reason I was a member of the crappy car club is I just refused to spend money on a brand new car. It didn't make sense to me, and so I'd always buy used. But then on top of it, I would never take care of them. And so if you're buying used and then you don't take care of them, that is not a great formula. I'll tell you what, if you've ever had a crappy car, just join me, just name it right now in the chat. Just name that car, join the crappy car club with me, all right? For a long time, I drove a Honda Civic, which is a good car. But mine, the one I had, I bought it used, and by the time I had it for a couple of years, everything was broken except the engine. Radio was broke, air conditioning was broke, CD player, who uses CDs, but it was broke. And now, here's the deal. It would get me from point A to point B, but only really the engine worked. Everything else was broken. Before that, I had a Toyota Paseo, and it was even worse. Just brutal. Now, one of the nice things, though, about having a crappy car is you don't need an anti-theft system. I mean, just looking at the car is enough of a deterrent. Nobody's going to steal that. Before that, I literally had a Toyota Corona. I've mentioned this before, and people go, oh, you mean a Corolla. No, a Corona. Yes, just like the virus. Now, these cars I'm talking to you about, they didn't start broken. Once upon a time, they were brand new. They worked perfectly. But by the time I got them and then abused them, yeah, they worked, point A, point B, but they were broken. And I use that kind of as an example because as I look at our world and I look at our country and life, I kind of feel the same way. Yeah, it works. We're getting from point A to point B most days, but man, it's broken. It's broken. And I think that leaves us with two really big questions to wrestle with this Easter. And here's these two big questions. First of all, how did we get here in this broken place? And then secondly, do we have any real hope? How did we get here, and do we have any real hope? Those are two of the biggest questions in the human experience. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're the most fundamental questions of our existence. We're all broken in different ways. We all have scars, and we all kind of walk through life with, a unique limp. But at the same time, we're searching for hope. Now, to answer these two big questions, I want to tell two stories of two journeys. The one story, it starts out good, but ends in death. And the second story starts out with death, but ends with hope. And here's the thing, you get to pick which story you want to live. The one that ends in death, or the one that ends in hope. And I'll tell you what, if at any point you decide you want hope, do this. Just text the name, pull out your phone, just text the name Jesus to 331-226-1686. Just text that, and we'll follow up with you. Now, the first story is the journey of what I'm going to call from the garden to the grave. And then the second story is the journey from the grave to the garden. Now, the first story. The first story answers this question right here, and it's the question, how did we get here? How did we get here? The story starts in the garden, and it's described in the very first pages of the Bible. And it's in the Garden of Eden. And the word that best describes this garden, the Garden of Eden, is the word shalom. Shalom. Now, shalom is a word that appears throughout the Bible. And while the word shalom in English is translated peace, it means peace, but it's actually something much bigger and even more inspiring than what you typically think of when you hear the word peace. Because when we hear peace, we think of, I need some peace and quiet, like an end to chaos. And shalom is that, but it's much, much more than that. Or maybe we think of peace as like a ceasefire, an end to fighting. And shalom is that, but it's much, much more than that. When shalom is used to describe the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve lived, it describes a world operating exactly as God intended it to. Nothing's broken. Nothing. Everything works flawlessly, beautifully, perfectly. See, in shalom, in that experience, there is no hurt. In shalom, there is no pain. In shalom, there is no death. So in the Garden of Eden, before the fall, there was perfect, imagine this, perfect shalom. And the first people, Adam and Eve, they lived in this shalom, and because they were there, they were fully alive. Or as we talked about last week, they were fully human. And things didn't just work. They didn't just get from point A to point B. No, they worked perfectly because nothing was broken. But the first story doesn't stay in the garden. When Adam and Eve choose to do life their own way and broke relationship with God, it had devastating effects. See, that was when brokenness then entered the world. They actually had to leave. They had to leave the garden of shalom. The very fabric of the created order of the world began to unravel. And all of creation began to experience not shalom, but a lack of shalom. And now suddenly things were not at all as God meant for them to be. Humankind was broken. And people started living lives that were less than fully human. The Apostle Paul just concisely explains how this happens in Romans chapter 5. Take a look at this. He says, for the sin of this one man, Adam, caused death to rule over many. See, this is how death and actually the brokenness we talked about entered the world. That's when it entered the world. And we still feel it. I mean, this last year, it was a year for me filled with death and funerals. Think about my Aunt Jean. My Aunt Jean, one of the sweetest ladies I've ever known. Or Chris. Chris Crispin, I mean, you just say, good guy. Love Jesus, what a good guy. Jessica. So beautiful, so much potential. Nadia, someone who was so hopeful, always encouraging other people. Michael, someone who had so much ahead of him. Stacy, who was this person who just ruthlessly loved the people around her. Lost. And I'll tell you what, I've probably been to more funerals than anyone listening to my voice right now. And at every funeral, every time, I always have this thought, I always have this feeling, this can't be the way it's supposed to be. This is not how God meant for it to be. But you know what happened? Death had entered the world. And because of that, now Adam and Eve were on a journey from the garden to the grave. And this journey from the garden now to the grave is a journey full of brokenness, full of sickness, disease, war, prejudice, distrust, and ultimately death. How did we get here? That's what we ask, right? How did we get here? The journey from the garden to the grave, it started with Adam, but then it continues for generations until it gets to people like me or people like you who do just like Adam did, and we reject God and we do life our own way. And that just fractures the world, fractures our lives. It brings brokenness. Now imagine if it ended there, if it ended in the grave, if that's where the story ends. And maybe you feel like that. Maybe you feel like that's where your story is today, that things are broken. Relationally, you're going like, man, some of the people I love the most, things are broken and I can't put it back together. Or emotionally, this last year has taken a toll on you and just emotionally you feel broken. Or spiritually, you feel like there's been a break and a distance between you and God. And the only thing that's for sure ahead is death. And none of us want to live like that. We long for, we look around for, we hope for something more. And see, that's what brings us to the second big question. And it's this: do we have any real hope? And the answer is an emphatic yes. Yes, there's hope. Yes, there's hope for you personally today. And yes, there's hope for us relationally. And yes, there's hope for our world globally. And it's because the first story, from the garden to the grave, actually has a sequel. And the sequel is a second story, and it's the story from the grave to the garden. If we go back to Romans 5:17, Paul explains both stories. And here's what he says. The first story: for the sin of this one man, Adam, caused death to rule over many. Now, here comes the sequel. And this is one of those occasions where the sequel is actually better than the original. But even greater is God's wonderful grace and His gift of righteousness for all who will receive it. It's for all of us, any one of us who will receive this. And here's what He's offering us: a triumph over sin, our own personal brokenness, and death, ultimately. How? Through this one man, Jesus Christ. And that's exactly what Easter's all about. That is exactly what Jesus' death and resurrection accomplished. And that is the story of Easter. Death overcome by life, despair conquered by hope. A story that seemed to have this fatal ending becomes a sequel with an eternal beginning. That's exactly what Jesus' resurrection accomplished. And it only seems fitting that Jesus' resurrection took place in a garden. On that first Easter morning, one of Jesus' followers, a woman named Mary, came to the grave. She came to anoint His body on the third day after His death. But when she gets there, the grave's empty. She thinks somebody's stolen Jesus' body. She doesn't know what to do. So she's standing there just crying, weeping. I want you to take a moment to picture how incredible this scene really is. Mary is literally looking into the grave. Over her shoulder is the garden, and it's Easter morning. She's exactly where many of us are this Easter morning. We're facing death. That's where we're headed. But as we move in that direction, we're looking all around for hope. That's what she's looking for. Stuck between the grave and the garden. But she doesn't know it yet. And in just a moment, she's going to be the first witness to the resurrection of Jesus. In a moment, she'll be the first person called by name from the grave back into the garden and hope. Let's pick up the story in John chapter 20, verse 14. It says this: she turned to leave and she saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. All right, I got to pause for a second. This is one of those small details that makes the resurrection story so believable for me anyway. I mean, here you have the greatest event in human history, and she doesn't recognize him. I mean, you don't make that up. You don't add that to a story. That had to have happened. It goes on, and Jesus speaks, says, "Dear woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. Oh my, this is now becoming like a blooper reel, right? "Sir," she said, "if you've taken him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will go and get him." Mary still doesn't quite get it. She doesn't understand what's happening, not yet. And then it happens. Jesus says, "Mary." Hey, Mary. Mary. He says her name. Jesus is speaking to her now words of hope. And she turned to him and she cries out, "Teacher, Jesus, it's you." Can you imagine hearing a guy that you thought was dead call out a name? And not just any name, but your name. And just like that, hope entered her world. And you see, that's how hope enters your world. And it's the only hope for our world. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed.
And like Mary, every one of us is being called into a brand new story this Easter. See, there's two stories. There's two journeys. The journey from the garden to the grave, and the journey from the grave to the garden. And all of us, we have a choice. And let me ask you, which journey are you on? Which story do you want to live? Which will you choose? This Easter, like that very first Easter, Jesus is calling people out of the grave of darkness and desperation and our own despair and brokenness into this garden of joy and redemption and very real hope. And maybe he's calling your name. Michael, Stephanie, Alia, hey Jennifer, Carlos, Ashley, Joshua, Amanda, Jalen, Sarah, Ajay, David. For some of you, right now, he's calling you for the very first time. And for others, he's calling you back to hope again. Now, how do you know? Well, for some of you, in this moment and the moments to come, you're going to think thoughts that aren't really your thoughts, maybe thoughts you never thought before, and you're going to know that's God calling you. For some of you, it won't be so much what you think, but it'll be more what you feel. You're going to be moved emotionally. Maybe you're already feeling it. And if you feel something inside, I'm telling you, that's God. That is God moving inside you. For others of you, you're going to be prompted, actually in your spirit. And that's the Spirit of God. And you're as that happens, you're going to know that can't be anything else other than God. And I want you to be extra sensitive to that right now. Because that will be a moment that you look back on where God, He pulled you out of the grave into the garden and gave you hope. In this next moment of both song and story, I want to introduce you to my friend Melissa Sagavo. She found hope after experiencing a heartbreaking death of someone she loved dearly. She has firsthand experience of traveling that journey from the garden to the grave. But it was Jesus who personally called her and offered her a brand new story, a sequel out of that grave into the garden. Now, at any time during this next moment of both song and story, we invite you to prepare and take your communion elements. Just take a piece of bread, and something to drink will do. The bread is a reminder of Jesus' resurrected body. Take the cup. It'll be a reminder of Jesus' blood. And as you do, you're saying yes to Jesus, a Jesus who's calling you out of the grave into the garden.
Treasures of faith are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you.
My name is Melissa Sagavo, and this is my story. I met my husband Bizo in college. We dated for 4 years and got married in 2005, and we were really happy. And we had always had a dream together to go to his home country, Papua New Guinea, to serve people. He was offered a job in 2013 in New Guinea, and so we went, started a new life overseas. He was working, I was teaching art, and we had a beautiful life together. We were building a home, and it was awesome. My husband was playing soccer, and all of a sudden he threw his hands up and fell backwards on the field. I was terrified. It was a flurry of activity. They started CPR. They worked on him for 45 minutes, and that was it. He was gone. So I was sitting on the floor of the clinic with my babies. They had been there at the game watching him play, watched him go down, and then there were tons of people and it was chaos. And so I had to tell them, hey, yeah, Daddy isn't here anymore. I'm a strong girl. I kind of pull myself up by my bootstraps and kind of make it and figure it out and be okay. But when I think about them not having their dad, it's a whole nother story. We had to leave New Guinea. I started a teaching job here in the States. We moved in with my parents, and it was so hard. It was so rough. I've asked why over and over and over and over again, to be honest. There's this part of me that knows that God was present, and there's a part of me that feels like he wasn't there. And that's really hard to reconcile. When we were still in New Guinea, after we had buried Bizo, I decided to break a bunch of dishes, the dishes we registered for when we got married. Threw them together against big sheets of plywood with loud blaring music, and I cried and I screamed and I swore. I just kind of let those dishes have it. So with all those broken dishes, we swept them up, put them into buckets. I think I had 3 or 4 big buckets full of dishes, and I made a beautiful mosaic on the top of his grave, and his brother poured the cement for me. That was super healing for me because I felt like I had a space to let that rage out, and I had a place where I was able to declare, this isn't right, this isn't fair. But then I was able, with that brokenness, to gather all those pieces together and make something beautiful out of it.
You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can.
The truth is that anyone who has experienced what I've experienced knows that the pain of this kind of grief is always there. But what I can tell you, I have seen God at work consistently, all along the way. After getting to work with a grief coach and having that just really kind of change my perspective and sort of get me to the other side of the grief, I had an opportunity to train to become a coach. And I said, yes, why, let's do that. I mean, what is life if we don't, utilize even the most broken parts of our stories and the most painful things, despite tragedy, despite being in a position where you feel like you don't know how you're going to survive it. You can still trust God in the middle of that. He's big enough to hold our sorrows and our grief and our pain and death.
You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can.
He turns mourning into dancing, gives beauty from ashes, turns shame into glory. Jesus is the only one who can. What I want to offer you this Easter is hope. The exact same hope that my friend Melissa found, that can be yours. So do me a favor right now. Go ahead and take out your phone. You probably have it near you. Maybe reach into your pocket or pull it out of your purse, wherever it is, just grab your phone. As you heard today, there are two stories. One that ends in death and one that ends in hope. And if you want hope, just text the name Jesus to 331-226-1686. That's right, just JESUS to 331-226-1686. You see, our mission here at Community is to help people find their way back to God. We want to come alongside you and help you on that journey from the grave to the garden, to help you find hope, the hope that Jesus offers every one of us. But let me ask you, did you at any point today, during our time together, sense that God was maybe calling you? I mean, for some of you, it feels like it's just something that has to change. That's the thought that comes to your mind. Something has to change. If that was your experience, I'm telling you, God was calling you. For others of you, you found yourself kind of emotional, unusually so. You felt something you don't normally feel. If that was your experience, that's God moving inside you. For still others, maybe it was a tug kind of in your spirit. That's God's Spirit calling you. And if that's the case, here's what I want you to do. I want you to respond by texting the name Jesus to 331-226-1686. And when you do, we'll follow up with you and help you take your next steps in your new story with Jesus. Now, maybe the next step will be a part of an Alpha small group where you can meet with others and discuss some of life's biggest questions and learn more about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Or maybe the next step is to be a part of Explore Community and to learn more about our church and how you can get involved. Or maybe the next step is to take our baptism class and learn more about this important step of publicly declaring a new direction and a new story with Jesus. We're here to help you find your way back to God. So go ahead right now. On your phone, just text Jesus to 331-226-1686 so that someone from Community can follow up with you soon. See, Easter's all about Jesus bringing hope into your life and your situation. And He invites every one of us to journey with Him from the grave to the garden. And my prayer is that you'll say yes to a God who's calling your name. Happy Easter, Community.
I'm so glad you're able to join us this Easter. As we wrap up, let me remind you that Jesus is calling your name, inviting you on a journey from the grave to the garden. If you sense that God is at work in your life, prompting you to respond to Jesus, don't let this moment pass you by. I want to encourage you to take the action Dave challenged us to. Text the name Jesus to 331-226-1686, and someone will follow up with you in the next couple days to help you take your next steps with Jesus. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like more information about our church or any of our upcoming events, let me encourage you to visit communitychristian.info. And of course, let me invite you to join us right back here next Sunday for Community Online. Have a great week, everyone, and once again, happy Easter.
Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, though darkness surrounds